All right, we have Special Agent Tim Bislam here from the FBI, works out of the Milwaukee office. Going to talk to you for the next hour, 20 minutes or so. Give your most attention and ask questions. He said he's open to that, so ask away, all right?
All right, great. Thanks, guys. You guys probably can hear me as I'm close to this, but can you hear me if I'm like walking around a little bit? Okay, good, because I kind of tend to walk around somewhat. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you guys a little bit about the FBI. So I'll just get into a little bit of background of myself so you guys kind of know where I came from and some of the things that I've done through the years. So I've been, started out, got my degree in criminal justice, went to University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. That was back in the mid to late 80s. Got hired, I did an internship at the district attorney's office in Milwaukee County, and so I did that my last semester. That turned out to be really good because they had some job openings as soon as I had done my internship. So I applied right away. I got hired as a victim witness specialist. So we assisted victims of crimes, witnesses of crimes, explained to them about the criminal justice system and how it works. A lot of domestic violence victims we worked with to get them into shelters, to get them all the programs and support that they needed. So I did that job for 2 years, and then I got hired as an investigator. So the district attorney's office in Milwaukee currently has probably 18 or so investigators. So to become an investigator, you got to go through your police academy. So similar to a lot of you guys who might be going through WCTC, to get me certified, I had to go to MATC in Oak Creek. So I went to that campus. So that was in 1991. And the reason I bring that up is because what happened shortly afterwards. So I get to go through the academy. Back then it was probably, can't quite remember, maybe it was 10 weeks and 400 hours, whatever it was. So I get done, come back to the district attorney's office, and that would have been in April or May of 1991. And only about 2 months later, probably one of the biggest cases in Milwaukee came about, and that was the Jeffrey Dahmer case. So in July of 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer of Milwaukee, was arrested by the Milwaukee Police Department, and in his apartment, of course, they found body parts and pieces of people of at least 11 different individuals in his apartment that evening, and through the subsequent investigation, learned that he killed a total of 17 people. So the Milwaukee Police Department did the entire investigation. So their homicide detectives worked it, their evidence people worked it, on and on and on. They put the case together. Jeffrey Dahmer gave a great statement to the police. For over 3 days, he interviewed with the police, they interrogated him, and he gave a full confession, and he talked about all of the homicides he committed. So he basically, once he got his defense attorney, they decided to plead guilty to 15 homicides, but they pled guilty by reason of insanity. So which means, if you guys through your criminal justice training, the insanity defense can be applied to someone who is guilty of what they did, in this case murder, but now they're saying the only reason I committed those murders is because I was insane at the time. So now we had to build a case for an insanity defense. So at the time I was a brand new young investigator in the DA's office, and I had a chance to help prepare the case for trial. They had multiple district attorneys, the prosecutors were there, and I was just helping with little bits and pieces. One of the most interesting things I got to do, though, was to listen to Dahmer being interviewed and evaluated by a psychiatrist. So over the course of 3 days, we hooked up video equipment and audio equipment, and Dahmer was in a small room. The psychiatrist was there. We'd get the camera all set up, get it rolling, and then we'd back up into a side room and we would watch and listen to the whole thing. We'd swap out the tapes when we needed, etc. So after 3 days, I got to hear Dahmer tell his entire life story, from way back to when he was a little tot all the way to his arrest and interview with the homicide detectives. So probably one of the most interesting things I've ever been involved with. And after all these years, even being with the FBI and some of the really cool cases, That by far was one of the most interesting. So right now, so that case still goes on. Those tapes are still out there. There's been some talk of even Netflix trying to get a copy of those audio and videotapes because they've done a series on Ted Bundy and others, and they have an interest in it. So there's a judge who's going to rule where those tapes go and how they're handled, etc. So we're coming up on 30 years of that entire case. But that's how I started my criminal justice career. And I was like, oh man, this is like the coolest job ever. Like, who would have thought in that short a time that I would be involved in something like that? Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever get involved with the Ed Gein investigation? He's a serial killer from Wisconsin.
Yeah, he's in Plainfield, Wisconsin. So Ed Gein, another one of the infamous serial killers of Wisconsin, he was much earlier though. He would have been in the 1950s. But if you remember Silence of the Lambs, the profiling movie of FBI, etc., what did they do for that character? They took parts of Ed Gein and parts of the Jeffrey Dahmer story, and they kind of made the evil character in that movie. What was his name again? Wild Bill, whatever he was, the serial killer in Silence of the Lambs. So that was really interesting in that, unfortunately, Wisconsin has two of the most nastiest serial killers that ever walked the earth. So that case was awesome. So that's what got me going into this field. So I stayed with the district attorney's office for about 4 years as an investigator, and then they started to have layoffs in the county. So I'm a Milwaukee County employee. They had layoffs, another bad budget year. So me and another young investigator, we both decided like, hey, let's leave now, but let's try to find a police department to go to where we can continue to work. So we both went to West Allis Police Department, and I stayed there for about 2.5 years at West Allis. I was just a patrol cop doing midnight shifts. And it was while I was there I decided to apply to the FBI. So made application, and from the first thing that I did to the last thing, it was about a year process. From taking like that first submission of my application, all the way through all the phases of being hired to the end. And that's about the average nowadays too. It's still about a year process to get hired. So it takes a little bit. Then you got a full background investigation, all that stuff. So that's what led me to the FBI. I processed through the Milwaukee field office, and what happens when you go to Quantico, everybody who gets hired as an agent goes to Quantico for training. Back then it was about 15, 16 weeks. Now they've increased it. It's up to like 22 weeks at the academy. But everyone gets trained kind of the same way, just like a lot of the police departments and sheriff's offices around town. You go through their academy to kind of learn their way. So after being in the academy for a couple weeks, and this is typical, you get to learn where they're going to send you. So it's very typical that you don't come back to the city you're from. The Bureau wants to kind of pull people out of their roots of where they're at, and they want to plop you into some other location. They think it's a better kind of a learning experience. And I think in the long side, I can see their point. I think in my case, it probably worked out. You get to learn a new city, kind of engage the people, and just learn different things. So I got my orders after the 6th week, and I got Minneapolis, Minnesota. So that was fine with me. I was thinking if I can stay in the Midwest, that's great. At the time, I had just gotten engaged. You know, kids are going to be coming probably soon. My family's from the Milwaukee area here. My wife's family's from the Milwaukee area. I knew I eventually want to come back here, but I'm at the whim of the Bureau. So I go in, I get Minneapolis. I'm only a 5-hour drive, so that's fine. So I'm up there for a total of 12 years before I get the chance to make it back to Milwaukee. So I got back to Milwaukee it's almost half and half. Roughly, I'm pushing 24 years in the FBI. So about 12 years in Minneapolis, 12 years back home for me here in Milwaukee. So that's kind of my background from a standpoint of the Bureau. We're going to get into a couple, and I'm just going to hit and highlight a couple of cases. What I like to do is if I'm in your guys' shoes, I don't want to sit there and kind of be bored with tons of PowerPoint. So this is a PowerPoint put together by someone else in our office. He rose up the ladder to a kind of the second in command of our office. He was going to give this presentation, but he happened to retire, so he passed it on to me. The only part I say that because there's parts in here that are very like policy related, And I'm like, okay, boring, man. I'm like, let's get to the cases. So there's parts in here that we talk more about cases, and that's where I want to get to, because I think that's what you guys really want to hear more of. So by the way, this guy, G.B. Jones, who was going to give it, he retired, but he landed a pretty good job. So he is Director of International Security for the NFL. So he is going to be traveling to, you know how nowadays the NFL is playing in all these foreign countries once in a while? This year, who knows? But in the last subsequent years, the NFL is trying to brand themselves all over the world, kind of. So they played in Mexico and London and all sorts of other places. So he got hired for that job, which is really pretty cool. So he has now moved on to some pretty neat things, I'm sure. And so anyway, so here I am to give the presentation to you guys. So these are some of the things we'll talk about, is just an intro kind of, some of the assets we provide, our jurisdiction, and some of our capabilities. So yeah, we can get the next one. So when you guys think about the FBI, my guess is going to be the same thing like my kids think and elsewhere. It's like criminal minds immediately jump out of like profilers, serial killers daily. Like we're encountering these guys and we're traveling on our fast jet and we're zipping all over the country and we're helping try to solve some of these really major cases. It does happen, but that's a tiny percent, right? So the majority of us stay put and we grind away at our cases like everything else. So we're obviously a federal law enforcement agency. We're under the Department of Justice. So as a lot of the other federal law enforcement agencies are under the Department of Justice, but not all. Some are under the Treasury Department, which right now Secret Service, IRS, Internal Revenue Service, they're kind of under the Treasury umbrella. So what's our primary function is criminal investigations. So again, we're going to get into a whole laundry list of the type of criminal cases that we work, but that's really what our function is. We kind of have branded ourselves in two ways. One, criminal investigations, but also since 9/11, we've shifted over to intelligence as well. So we're kind of like a domestic intelligence agency collecting data and information that will be helpful to protect the United States against any national threats, but also we use that same data on the criminal side to build criminal cases. So we kind of are doing two things. So the jurisdiction over 300 federal statutes. So the one thing I will say about the FBI is we do a lot of stuff. The type of cases is so broad ranging that it's amazing that we can even get done as much as we have on our plate, because almost every federal violation the FBI has jurisdiction to work. And that's not the same for all the other federal agencies. So for example, DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, what do they enforce? Drug laws, right? That's kind of it. Drug laws, conspiracy cases, money laundering, all that kind of mushed together. Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, ATF. So what do they investigate? Alcohol, tobacco, firearms. So they kind of have that whole group of stuff, a lot of weapon charges, all that type of stuff. Arson cases. But there's a subset of violations that they look at and they enforce. Internal Revenue Service, IRS. What do? Taxes. They enforce the tax code. They also can brand out a little bit into like money laundering cases, but they got to kind of have a hook into some tax fraud scheme. So that's what they do. The one thing I will say about our agency is we do all of that plus. So all of that plus. And we'll show you a long list of the different things. But the variety is what I love about the agency is, and I've been around long enough to work a certain thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. And after a while, 5 years of working one type of thing, you kind of want to change. And we've got that change. And the change is very different from the other stuff. Counterterrorism, work in terrorist groups. Counterintelligence, work in spy networks. Then we have the broad variety of all the criminal things, kidnapping cases, arson for profit, white-collar crime, on and on and on and on and on. We have just a huge array of cases. And that's really the nice part, and that's what I personally like about it, is the variety that we get. And at this point, after 24 years, I've worked a bunch of different things, and right now that's what I like about it. I can constantly go and like, that was super interesting, this was interesting, this was even more interesting. And so again, that's as an agency, we probably have the broadest amount of violations that we work. Yes, sir?
What's like a typical case like you work like every day, like you come into work and like how do you get assigned your case, you know?
Okay. Can I get into that a little bit later? We're going to hit that up. I'll make sure I answer that for you. But I do want to talk about one of the biggest things I want to do today is try to give as many personal case examples as I can, because to me that's more interesting than anything else. Talk about stuff that I've actually worked on, talk about stuff that I've actually helped with, because that will help, I think, you guys have a better broad base of and better understanding of what we do. All right, so this is the organizational structure. So we'll get into kind of this type of stuff for the beginning so you guys have an understanding how big the agency is. So we've got one big director, right? So we've got Chris Wray is currently the FBI director. We had Comey, Jim Comey beforehand. President Trump fired him. He's out of office. Pretty rare to happen, very rare to happen, but it happened. So FBI director usually has like a 10-year term, but they have to be, you know, the Senate, there's a confirmation hearing where the senators and stuff have to agree with it. So, but currently our director right there, Chris Wray, we've got 56 field offices. So what does that mean? So all of the red dots that are on the America here is going to represent one of the major field offices. So when we pull apart Milwaukee, our only one dot is right down here in Milwaukee in the state of Wisconsin. So when we look at Milwaukee, Milwaukee is the field office, but then we have a thing called resident agencies. The Bureau has almost 400 resident agencies, satellite offices, smaller offices dotted throughout the United States to help cover the big area, right? We have a big country. So when you look at Wisconsin, Milwaukee again is the hub. The bulk of the agents are here in Milwaukee. The bulk of the work is in Milwaukee. But then we need help because we've got gangs and drugs and stuff all over the place. So we've got agents in Madison is probably the next big one. Green Bay, Wausau, we have like 2 agents. La Crosse, so way on the western part of the state, we've got 2 agents there. Eau Claire, so now we're hitting more up north. And then we actually just added Superior. So all the way in the tippy top of the state, we've got 1 agent who tries to cover that area. And what do those agents typically do? A lot of stuff, it's bank robberies, you know, where it has a clear federal nexus. They'll probably work a lot of times with local law enforcement, work different task force groups. A lot of it's drug related, but they help cover whatever needs to be done in those areas. So just a couple weeks ago, I was in Minocqua, Wisconsin. Do you guys know where Minocqua is? Straight up north, about 3.5, 4 hours, right kind of center of the state, but more north. So I'm up in Minocqua, and we're checking out the area, et cetera, me and my wife, and we're looking for a place to eat. And I pulled up on a map, we're Google mapping it, we're just looking for restaurants, and all of a sudden I'm looking like, Little Bohemia? I'm like, hey, that's where the Dillinger shootout was. And I just didn't realize it was that close to Minocqua. In my mind, I'd never been there before. In my mind, I always thought it was just much further up north. I'd never been there. So we go to Little Bohemia is the name of the lodge, and it's like a supper club there, and stop in there, and I'm like, oh man, I totally forgot about this. I mean, this was the Dillinger shootout from 1934, where John Dillinger, at the time, the most wanted fugitive in America, he's crossing all throughout America, and he's bank robbery, he's shooting people, getting shoot out with cops. And he is like one of the most prolific bank robbers at the time. So FBI gets a tip that he's in this lodge way up in the tippy part of Wisconsin, right? I mean, it's Sleepyville up there. It's all cow pastures all the way there, and you get to a couple little cities, right? So they get to Little Bohemia, and back in those days, we didn't even have a Milwaukee office. The biggest office was in Chicago, and the next biggest was in St. Paul, Minnesota. So those two officers talked to each other like, hey, we got a really good tip that John Dillinger is in this little lodge up in northern Wisconsin. So they jump in their cars. I think they took a small plane to get to the local airfield there. They fly into town there. They start to formulate a plan. Okay, if Dillinger's here with his posse, meaning his gang of guys, we got to get as many people as we can. So they quickly got as many agents. I don't even know what the total number was, but I don't know. It's maybe 10 agents with a couple of the local law enforcement guys. Try to surround the place and take Dillinger into custody. Well, big shootout happens, machine gun fire all over the place, leaves one FBI agent dead, a number of them wounded. Constable, one of the local law enforcement up there, gets shot. It's just this massive shootout. 1934 in the middle of northern Wisconsin. Who would have thought, right? So I only bring that up is because we, the FBI, have to come up with a plan. How do we cover our entire country? The only way to do it is we got to put people in all these little, not all these towns, but like Superior, and he's going to cover these 3 counties up there. In Wausau, and Wausau is going to cover these counties. So we got to have that in place so that we can quickly make a phone call and say, we got something in your neck of the woods to help deal with it. They usually have a great relationship with local law enforcement because they work a lot of their cases with them. So they make a call to local law enforcement, hey, we need your help, we've got a federal thing going on, can you guys pull together a bunch of cops and let's go take care of it. So that's why we have it, yes.
Real quick, you guys want to remember 56 field offices. Time your test. Is that Little Bohemia the place that still has like the bullet holes?
Yeah. Yeah, Little Bohemia, if you ever get there, it's really cool. They kept all the bullet holes in the walls and the glass and all over the place. So you see this old shootout where they had the Thompson machine guns, you know, that bah, you know, handguns, 45s, Thompson machine guns, and there's like hundreds of rounds in this building there. So it's really, really cool to go to. Great history to it. I'm glad they kept it there. There's a little museum up there. It's closed now because of COVID. But there's a museum, you can go upstairs to see where Dillinger was, etc. He died, by the way, so he got in another shootout down in Chicago just a few months afterwards, and major shootout, Dillinger shot dead. So Babyface Nelson was another infamous outlaw at that time. He also was part of that gang. He was up there in Little Bohemia. A lot of them, they escaped the shootout. Dillinger escaped. So anyways, long story short, great history, and this goes back to the 1930s. Like, that's really neat. Back in those days, too, now you start wondering why, like, law enforcement had to really start arming themselves better, because think about that. We were totally outgunned. We had a little 6-shooter, just a revolver gun, and they got Thompson machine guns, right? Like, what's happening in the streets nowadays, like, almost every squad car has got, what, a long gun in it, an assault rifle. Because the bad guys have assault rifles and sometimes even more. But we got to try to even the fight a little bit. Like, they're bringing big weapons, and we've got to be able to match that because we're trying to keep people safe. That's part of what we're doing. The other big part, too, is the 62 foreign liaison posts. We call them Leaguette offices. So these are spread throughout the world. So almost wherever there's a U.S. embassy in the world, there's working FBI agents. So it's probably a small number. I've been to several of them now, and every embassy usually has a couple of FBI agents working it. The reason that they're there is because think about crime nowadays. Like, crime is global. Like, how many cases do we work where it's cyber attacks, where cyber sleuths are getting into our access to our computers and they're stealing all the data, and they somehow wipe our bank account clean, and they steal our credit card numbers, and they do this, that, the other thing. Global terrorism, counterintelligence, spy networks. It's all global. So we, the FBI, have to expand our hold, not to just the United States, but we have to have a presence all over the world. If, for example, a plane crashes, and let's say it's a bomb on a plane where Americans are on board, plane's in the air, bomb goes off, people dead. If there's an American on board, the FBI has jurisdiction in no matter what country it occurred to investigate it. Any country who had a citizen aboard has jurisdiction to at least get involved and try to find out who caused the death of their citizen. So those things have happened right through the years. We've had a number of planes that have blown up, and the FBI needs to get involved quickly. So with having people overseas and spread out throughout the world, we have a quicker response to get there, and we've liaisoned with the foreign law enforcement agencies. So most recently, about 2 years ago now, I was in Paris, France. I was working a really old, rare car, was stolen out of Milwaukee about 20 years ago. We were able to track it down. We knew that the car was being restored over in France. So I flew over there, me and a Milwaukee detective I was working with, and we investigated the case. We met with our FBI liaison. They got together with us. They helped set up the whole thing. They liaisoned with the French police and the French authorities so that we could come over there and investigate our crime. So it was really cool when it works that way. It's really nice to have it. So it's super important, especially with these global crimes that we're working, is to have a network of people out there. So one of the other things too, you're thinking about foreign travel, you're thinking about job careers, we're all over the world. So I bring that up to a lot of young people like you guys self, is when some of you are itchy to travel, you love traveling, there's a chance you could get to, you name it, to any one of those 62 posts overseas. Or if nothing else, you're here in the States, but you get a case that might take you to those places. And the Bureau is really good that if it's your case, you know all the details, they'll pony up for you to fly to wherever you need to go to get that case solved. So that's really good, so very helpful. So you look at agents, how many? Yeah, 12,500 agents, roughly 13,000 FBI agents. And then you've got the 20,000 professional support employees, and those are everyone from, people that evidence response people, photographers, people that work in our labs. So we've got scientists that work in the labs doing all the DNA. Fingerprints are still solving crimes, so we have people there. A lot of analysts, intelligence analysts, so that is a really, really big area after 9/11 that the Bureau got heavy on, so we're hiring a lot of analysts. So even if any of you are thinking, the field is interesting, criminal justice is interesting, but I don't know if I'm the type of person who wants to go out there arresting people, kicking in doors, and having a gun, right? You don't have to do those things, but you can still be involved in the system. So you like cases, you like doing all those things, you just don't like the idea of carrying a gun. An analyst is a great position. An analyst, you get involved in the cases, you get to collect the evidence, you're figuring things out. It's a big chess game, some of these cases. You're doing all of that work, you're just not carrying a gun. And that's fine, right? Because we need all of that support to make our cases. So when you think about careers, when you think about all that, think about, I don't have to be a gun toter. I could be an analyst helping solve cases without having to carry a gun and do all that stuff. Okay? Next, please. So this one, we'll breeze through this one pretty quick. So this is just our Milwaukee field office, how it's set up. One guy in charge, SAC means Special Agent in Charge. So one guy runs the field office, and he's got 2 assistant special agents in charge on both sides. One of them, ASACs we call them, one of them does the counterterrorism, intel, national security stuff. So that's how we kind of have it broken down. One does more national security. The other one does all the other stuff, which is more the criminal side. So that's how it's sort of broken up. This one here is also has oversight at all the RAs. We talked about the resident agencies, Madison, Green Bay, La Crosse, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how the office is. So now we kind of get into more of the fun stuff here, the investigative programs. So this is where we start to break down the type of stuff that we work. And remember, we've got 300 and so criminal violations that we're enforcing. A lot of those will be found in here, but those are the type of cases. Now, counterterrorism. Now I'm getting to be old enough in the FBI that there's not a whole lot of me's around, which is people that have been around on 9/11. So on 9/11, I mean, that's where it really changed. So the Bureau was really heavy on criminal work with a little bit of national security work. We always did some form of national security, especially counterintelligence, which is like the spies. Who's stealing our information? Who's trying to get access into our computer databases, et cetera, et cetera. So after 9/11 hit, we shifted almost completely the other way. We went super heavy on intelligence gathering to avoid another 9/11. We had to now start learning about all these global networks out there. And believe it or not, folks, there's some people that just hate America, period. They just hate America. They will do whatever they can to stop America from progressing and succeeding. So people out there just hate us. So realize that. That's the one thing a lot of people, I think Americans out there just are kind of, they see nothing but flowers and rainbows, but realize that in this world there are some really bad people. And some of those bad people are coming and they're targeting us. They're targeting our way of life. They're targeting for religious reasons, ideological reasons, on and on and on and on. But realize that happens. So in order to fight that, we, at least our agency, has to try to put up the best shield we can, and that's why we went super heavy with the intelligence gathering, because we wanted to know it before it happened. We can't let another 9/11 happen, right? We got to avoid that at all costs. So intermixed with this, a couple personal stories. So 3 weeks before 9/11, I'm in the Minneapolis field office, right? Our office gets a call. Remember, 3 weeks before 9/11. Our office gets a call one day. Duty agent takes the call, and the guy says he's from a flight academy right outside of Minneapolis. It's in Eagan, Minnesota. It's like 30 minutes from downtown Minneapolis. So at the flight academy, they have a student, and the student is just, something isn't quite right. There's a number of things, red flags that are going off. For example, the student is paying in all cash. He's a Middle Eastern guy, which that in and of itself is not different, but Middle Eastern people oftentimes pay in cash, so that wasn't all the red flags. But he was asking really peculiar questions. And one day he's in the flight simulator, so now when you're at this flight academy, you're learning how to fly the biggest planes, 747s. The people who show up to take this course, it's really expensive. It's like $6,000, $7,000 to take this course. The people who are taking it are like super serious. They want to fly the big jets and be paid, right? On American Airlines, Delta, you name it. Well, this guy, so by the time you get there, most students have several thousands of flight hours in smaller aircraft. So they're serious about this business. This is their profession. This is what they do. They're graduating up to the bigger ones now. This character comes along, and he's barely got 100, 200 flight hours on some little junky planes in the US, shows some credentials of him going to some other flight school, getting 100 hours, which is nothing. 100 hours is nothing for these pilots. So he's got like barely any flight hours, and he's wanting to pay all this money to go into this flight simulator and to take this really expensive course. So it's not making sense. Then one day he's in the cockpit of the simulator, and while the class is focused on all the bells and whistles and gauges over here, he's looking around and he's looking at the door and he's checking out like the lock on the door and all this stuff. And the instructor's just looking around and he's like, what's this guy doing? Like, this is just strange. Like, the guy's paying a lot of money, should be paying attention like everybody else. But he's doing this. And then he talks about, and you may have heard this, who's the guy who said, I don't really want to know how to take off and land. I just want to like know how to operate it when it's in the air. Like, who says that, right? Like, so there's all these red flags that are starting to poke up, right? So this guy who calls our office was a former, he was a military, I can't remember what branch he was in, probably Air Force. But he was a military guy, and at least military's got some training in like trying to spot and identify bad actors, right? Like national security is on their mind, like they teach them. So he's like, something's odd. I'm going to call the FBI and just alert them. Something's weird with this guy. I just wanted to check him out. So he calls our field office, and the agent who gets the call, he takes it, and he doesn't work national security stuff. He's a criminal agent. So he's like, oh, okay, you got some guy suspicious, gets his name, information, whatever. Goes to the terrorism squad, shows the terrorism guy. He's like, hey, I just got a call on this guy here. His name's Zacharias Moussaoui. So the terrorism guys get it, and they're like, okay, so what's the story? Yeah, okay, asking weird questions. All right, let's go check it out. So the two terrorism agents go to the flight school and they interview the caller, so the flight instructor. And the flight instructor says, hey, I've been around a long time. I've been in the military a long time. I know flight students. I know all about this business. Something's up with this guy. Gut feeling plus all these other weird things. So the agents decide to look into it further. They're like, well, all right, so we got a name of this guy. We don't have a whole lot more. Check it out. He was born in Morocco, kind of digging into his background a little bit. Okay, maybe some other foreign travel. It takes a while to start getting those records. In the meantime, they decide to just go interview the guy. They're like, let's just ask this guy, get a feel for him. What's the story? So they go to interview the guy. And when they sit there, and you just know it when somebody's lying to you, right? I mean, their story is all over the place, and nothing makes sense. All over the place. So you start asking, well, how did you pay cash? Okay, not all that unusual. Most people don't, that's fine. But you only got a couple hundred hours of flight time. Why would you ever want to learn how to fly a 747? On and on and on and on. Evasive, not answering the question, all over the board. Right away, bells and whistles are going off. This guy's doing something he ain't supposed to be doing. So thank goodness, at the time, we were enforcing our immigration laws better than what we are now, but he was in America on a student visa. That's important because when he signed up to get a visa to come into our country, he said, I'm going to attend this university, right? And when he came to America, this is the loophole that a lot of people do. They put all that down, say I enrolled in this university, but when they come here, they never step foot on campus. It's only a smokescreen so they can get in the United States. They never intend to go to school. Now they're here in the United States, and now they blend into society, right? They just blend in. So they started looking this guy up. He was supposed to be attending school. He wasn't. They had a reason to arrest him. Immigration violation. So they put him in custody. So they arrested him on an immigration violation. He violated this visa law, whatever it was, immigration. So boom, he's in custody. So lock him up, and they start digging into this guy. And they're finding more stuff and more stuff. And they're finding he traveled to some unique places. Eventually, there's one country that hits a lot of alarms, which is Afghanistan. And at the time in Afghanistan was the training of a number of terrorist camps. Now, trying to pull this information together, remember, it's not like, let's see if I got her name, Penelope Garcia, right? From Criminal Minds. Oh my God, if I had a Penelope, the crimes I could solve. She immediately has the answers just like that. Like she can get into your financial records. Oh, you were a delinquent, sealed records. Oh, no problem. I'm going to get into those. I know your whole family history, right? To have a Penelope would be awesome. In real world, you can get those answers, but it takes a while, right, to get all that. Yes, sir?
Does FBI ever hire like hacker type people like that decide from bad to good and start working?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like her?
Yeah. So we do. We've had hackers. We've had to go to these people. Usually what happens is you make a case against them. So you catch them hacking. You're able to charge them criminally. And then you sort of cut a deal with them. And you say, here's the choice. You go to prison or you can decide to work for the Bureau. So now you start working national security and we make sure that we prove you're going to be helpful and not in the backside still doing something over here, some other crime stuff. So, but yeah, all the time. I mean, not all the time. It happens for sure. Some of the hackers out there are unbelievably skilled, better skilled than the people we have on our payroll. So that can happen, absolutely. So pulling this stuff together takes a while. In the meantime, it's 3 weeks before 9/11. Next thing that happens is 9/11. It hits. I remember going to the field office that day and running into those terrorism agents, and they were furious. And they're furious because they knew. They were like, our dude that we arrested, Moussaoui, he was supposed to be on one of those planes. No doubt about it. He was one of the terrorists. So he is what they, nowadays, if you look online, Google the 20th hijacker, that's Zacarias Moussaoui. He was on all the planes that hit that day. There was, I think, 5 terrorist hijackers on each plane, except for one, and one had the 4. That's the one that went into Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Probably because he's never talked to us, and he always claims his innocence, so we never hear this from him. but it would make you believe that he was intended to be on that last plane that did not hit its target that day, but that he certainly was supposed to be on there. He was, for sure, one of the hijackers. He went to trial, he got convicted, he's got life in prison, so he'll be locked up the rest of his life. But he is the 20th hijacker, if you guys look into that. And now think about this, in Minneapolis, it's like Wisconsin. It's all farm fields, right? It's all open. The city gets to be big, but who would have thought we would have had a 9/11 terrorist in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time? And sure enough, that's what happened. So, I'm sorry.
Flight 93 was intended for the Capitol, or U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't know if they 100% put it on there, but everyone surmises 100%. So the Flight 93 that went down in Pennsylvania, that was intended probably for the U.S. Capitol or even the White House. And I think that's what they really surmise based on all the intel, but I don't know if a terrorist has actually told us that. You know, for example, like it would be great if Moussaoui would actually talk and be truthful, but if he does talk, it's never truthful and it's just more lies. So he has just decided to live out his life that way. So we got a lot of different cases here. So that's the counterterrorism. Now you see why the FBI shifted heavy onto national security. You imagine that? So think back. A lot of you guys were born, not born at that time, maybe. 3,000 Americans slaughtered like that with those planes flying into buildings. That's a nasty one. So after that time, we put a lot of resources, and for good reason, into that whole intel part of it. We want to find out, of course, before it happens next time. Since that time, there have been multiple terrorist attempts in our country that have been thwarted. And the way we're doing it is with good intel up front, agents working cases, get sources into the mix, try to get the sources to record these conversations between parties deciding on how they're going to shoot and kill Americans. For example, real quick, we have the Scottish Temple in Milwaukee. Just 4 years ago, he was charged right here in the city of Milwaukee. Palestinian kid, believed all the jihadist stuff he was hearing, radicalized, and he was plotting and planning to go into the Masonic Lodge downtown Milwaukee and shoot and kill everyone that he encountered that day. That's what his plan was. Took him down beforehand, made the case, arrested him. He's still in that case is still actually ongoing. Yes, sir.
What's Homeland Security's job then if you guys are mostly in counterterrorism now?
They kind of, it's interesting. Homeland Security was created after 9/11. And we kind of had, it's interesting, the agencies have kind of like overlapped a little bit on a number of things. But Homeland Security is exactly that. More looking at, at the domestic part of it. They're not as robust as us in some ways, like they don't have we've got the 62 foreign, we got agents throughout the world. They're kind of not at that level where they have spread out that far. But domestically, they try to keep a lot of the focus on the U.S. They work a lot of criminal cases, and a lot of it's similar to what we do. A lot of it could be the immigration type laws, identity theft. We've realized that all of these terrorists, what do? They try to get a fake identity so that they can travel around the United States. So they do a lot of those type of things. So a lot of it is pretty darn similar. Yeah, we work a lot with them actually on stuff. Man, going real fast here. Let's see, we go to 12:50, right? Yeah. So cyber crimes, again, tell you a real quick personal story. So we talked about all the hacking that goes on. Personally, I think my bank account's been hacked 3 times. At least 3 times, I think. So you get the call, right? All of a sudden, hey, did you make a big purchase in Timbuktu? And you're like, what are you talking about? They're like, yeah, we've got a $1,000 purchase here. And you're like, nope, that wasn't me. So someone obviously got my credit card number. They're trying to make purchases, on and on. So I bring that up is because there's a lot of people sitting in wherever they're sitting in whatever foreign country. Oftentimes it can be in foreign countries or of course here, and they're hacking into systems. They're going onto the dark web. If any of you guys ever heard of the dark web, it's a place where you can buy and do a lot of illegal things. Most people think that it's anonymous. A lot of people think that, but it can be viewed and it can be seen by law enforcement. So we will go there. There are incredible criminal cases, like guys doing really, really bad stuff. You can order up almost anything you want on it, any drug that you want, right? And it might be shipped right to your house. So let's say a guy gets away with it maybe 9 out of 10 times, but that 10th time we're going to be watching that and hopefully put an end to it, right? We don't need that poison coming into into America. So we had a case a couple years back, and it was a tax fraud refund scheme. So I was working with an IRS agent, and the IRS guy said, man, we've got this case we're working. So basically they're stealing your identity, these hackers. Once they have your identity, they'll file your tax return on your behalf. So you don't even know what's going on. You're just sitting here cool and happy and going to work every day and living your life. And all of a sudden, a tax return goes to the IRS. They're really good. They know exactly what to say. They know exactly how to fill it out so that the IRS, it looks legit to them, so they pay your tax refund. But the money gets diverted into this other account, and it goes back to bad guy. So they were doing this over and over again, and they were just nailing our whole Milwaukee metro area. So the IRS was watching this. On top of it, what we learned later on, they were doing the ransomware schemes. So the ransomware scheme is when you're on your computer at home and all of a sudden it gets frozen and locked up and you can't do anything. Anything you do doesn't do a darn thing, and it freezes your screen, and it basically like takes over your computer. And it says the only way to unfreeze your computer is to call this 1-800 number. So you call that number, and who knows where you're calling, in some foreign country, not always foreign countries, somebody's basement somewhere, and they have put a virus, somehow they got that virus into your system, but they've locked down your computer, and they say the only way we're going to release it is if you pay us $300. $300 has to be paid on a green dot card, sent to such and such an address, so it's more anonymous. So you pay the money, it goes to this green dot card. You get your computer back, you're happy. Some people are not happy. They're freezing company accounts, company computers, they're shutting down businesses, and they're trying to extort money out of people left and right. So I say all of that because all of a sudden one day IRS comes to us, we start working jointly with them. Sure enough, we have a family that we can see locally here who's on the tax refund scheme, where the money is going, and then they're going around to different banks because the money gets deposited onto a debit card. They go to different banks, they withdraw all the cash, they get the cash, and then they were wiring the money off to Ukraine. So we found out that one of the relatives here in the Milwaukee area had a relative in the Ukraine who was receiving the money. And that scheme was about $1.5 million of stolen funds that they've taken. So we're able to arrest the local ones here that we can get our hands on, got arrest warrants, got them in custody. Now the brother who lives in Ukraine, all we could do is get an Interpol warrant for him. So an international arrest warrant is basically what that is. Some countries we have really good relationships with. Some countries, if we have one of our fugitives there, they'll help us out, and they'll help arrest the person for us, get him in custody, and extradite him to the United States, right? So it's a great process when it works. Some countries are not so friendly. China's not friendly with us. Russia's not friendly with us. Ukraine is not friendly with us. They're probably getting more friendly because we're assisting them by keeping Russia from completely taking over their country. You remember when Russia came in and took over half of Ukraine? Well, we've helped them out, so now Ukraine is becoming more helpful to the United States since we're keeping the Russians out to some degree. Long story short, my bad guy criminal, I got an Interpol warrant, decides to travel somewhere. This is about a year later, so the family's already here. The family gets convicted, they get sentenced to prison. About a year later, I get a phone call. Hey, we've got your fugitive. He just got arrested in Lithuania. So he traveled by plane from Ukraine to Lithuania. When he hit the airport, Lithuanians did their due diligence, looked up his name, boop, warrant pops. Let's go arrest the guy, Interpol warrant. So they nab him. So the next thing we do is the U.S. Marshals flew out to Lithuania to go pick him up, grab him, bring him back to the United States. Next thing I know is I'm sitting across from him at in the courtroom in Milwaukee Federal Building. So now I've got my mastermind Ukrainian fugitive who's now sitting next to us. And at this point, he knows he's going to get pretty significant prison. So what do most people do who are in that same spot? All of a sudden they decide to cooperate. So now they're looking to get themselves and reduce their time. So some people have been very helpful to us by doing that. Just like you were saying with the hackers, you catch them doing something bad, you make a case on them, and now they're kind of forced. Either they can go to prison for 10 years or they can start working with law enforcement and help us, and we can try to reduce it. If they do good stuff for us, we can reduce it. I've had guys that have pled guilty to 20 years in prison, and I reduced their sentence to 0. They've worked, they did so much stuff for us, so much good work. I made 20 more cases off of this guy, and because of that, you tell the judge all of this work they've done, reduced all the way to 0, and a guy walks away with 3 years probation or something. So it all depends, type of case, all those things. So here he is, Ukrainian subject, he's in custody, he's here in America, we got justice, right? We're trying to get all the funds back, whatever we can. So cyber crimes, global, worldwide, many times. Public corruption, worked a fair amount of public corruption. Those are going to be sometimes your city officials who are taking bribes for one reason or another. If you know anything about a lot of city government, they don't make a lot of money. Most people don't go into city government because they think they're going to be millionaires. For example, when I was in Minneapolis is where I worked most of my cases. We had the city council members making about $70,000 a year. So $70,000 for a full-time job isn't a whole lot, right? So many times we will see city officials start to take money on the side. So they're getting bribed to do some of their work. So for example, one day we had in our office a guy comes, he's a contractor and a builder, and he said, hey, you know, I was trying to get a license, some rezoning done in the city of Minneapolis. And he said, I go to meet with the alderman just to make sure he would support it, because I'm going to do something really good. I'm going to put all this housing in this area that's kind of blighted. And he said, the city council member immediately starts talking about like, well, you know, I've got bills too. He's like, what do you mean you have bills too? He's like, well, you know, I'd like to help you, but, you know, I probably could pay a little more attention if you help me. And he's like, well, what do you mean exactly? And he's like, well, I've got some outstanding bills, and maybe for $5,000 I could put a lot more attention into your rezoning. So this builder guy comes back to us. He's like, okay, I've been in business long enough to know I'm not supposed to bribe anybody to get my zoning. That's what city officials do, right? This is their job. This is what happens. This dude wants to pay me in cash, or he wants money in cash. So we take that builder, we wire him up, send him back to the politician to try to recapture that same conversation. He recaptures it, he gets it on tape, it's all recorded now, it's on video, it's on audio, and we do this. So now we've got the city councilman who sounds like he's willing to take a bribe, who's discussing basically a bribe. So now we play out the whole scenario. So we wait a couple weeks and we get to the point where we need that zoning, we need that to be done. So our business guy goes back and meets with the city councilman, and we've got $5,000 in cash, all marked bills in an envelope, and it gets slid across the table to the councilman, takes it, sticks it in his pocket, he leaves. So we make not only one bribe payment, but a second bribe payment, and then a third bribe payment. And now we look at the prosecutors and we're like, now do you have enough evidence to pursue this guy? So as a prosecutor who's going to be doing it, you always want more evidence and more evidence, right? You're going to see cops are always going to be, sometimes the prosecutors, you're always kind of ripping on them because you're like, all right, how much more evidence do I got to put? You know, it's all on videotape, it's all on audio tape, it's all marked bills. So the prosecutor's like, all right, now we got enough. So sure enough, we go and we arrest the city council member, and usually those cases, public corruption cases, are usually pretty big. The press gets on them. Front page of the newspaper, you know, city councilman member takes bribe, blah, 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 all caught on video. So we go to trial. A lot of times these guys think they can talk their way to a jury, and they're hoping one juror is not going to convict them. And once you have it all on tape, that's the beauty of it, is you get to convict these guys. Civil rights violations. Organized crime is an area I've been working for quite a few years, so I got a lot of organized crime type stories. A lot of them are not like the old days organized crime, like in New York and Chicago, the Al Capones and the this, that, and New York's got all the crime families. Milwaukee, of course, being much smaller, we don't have that type of an influence, but we have lots of criminal enterprise groups that are looking to steal all sorts of money. So those are the type of groups that I'm mostly working. Of course, white-collar crime, violent crimes, major offenders. Probably one of the best examples I want to give on violent crime is Jamie Kloss. So who remembers the Jamie Kloss case? Right? Yeah, a number of you do. That was, I don't say it was just last fall, wasn't it? So like a year ago?
I don't know, this is a really long year, so.
Man, this year is crazy. I was thinking about it actually coming here, and I'm like, I think it was last October. It seems like it was 10 years ago already. But the Jamie Kloss case, where all of a sudden you get mom and dad are murdered by somebody who kicks in the door and then snatches this young girl, 13-year-old girl, and leaving literally almost no trace of anything behind. So whenever you have a case like that, local PD, local sheriff's office, it's a lot of work, right? This is a really nasty crime. So we will try to get there to help and work with them to try to get this sucker solved. So we flooded it with a lot of agents, put a lot of people in there, get our evidence teams in there to comb through the house one more time to find any little trace of evidence, any DNA, any fingerprint, anything of anything. Canvass the whole neighborhood, find out if anyone saw something weird, unique. So on and on. So that went on, and I'll tell you what, that is one case where I couldn't believe it. We had like almost nothing leading up until her, we all know the story, right, how she finally escaped, right? So the guy who kidnapped her, killed mom and dad and kidnapped her, he went up to northern Wisconsin further and then hid her in the house basically. And she was there for, kind of losing track of this, but a month or two, and a couple of months at least, I think. And then eventually she was able to basically escape. But I'll tell you what, it was, for a lot of us that have been around, I've never had a case where, like there was one thing, we did have a description kind of the car, a video caught a red car on or about the time of the crime that kind of went through the area. And that's about it. Like we had no physical evidence, we had no witnesses, we had nothing. It was amazing to me that we had so little to go on, and thank God that girl was able to get out of that. But I bring that up for a couple of reasons, because I always, when that case got solved, the one thing that went through my mind was, you know, working the Jeffrey Dahmer case or being part of it, I was like, this guy, and I can't remember his name, and that's a good thing because we don't want to talk about our subjects, but he pulled off a pretty good crime with very few clues. And he's 21 years old, and I kept thinking to myself, what if he got away with this one? So what if Jamie Kloss, she never escaped, and she didn't get out? And of course he would have killed her because he would have got bored of her and he would have moved on to somebody else. But he put enough thought and effort into it that he really stymied the law enforcement for a long time. And going through my mind was, that is the type of guy who on his next one, because they never stop with one, on his next abduction, murder, kidnapping, he's going to only get better. Like he got kind of lucky on his first one, but he was only going to get better and better. And I thought to myself, man, this would have been one nasty serial killer out there. Like this guy would have traveled, and if he got done with the state of Wisconsin, he would have moved on and elsewhere. The one thing that kept him from probably becoming even better, and this is similar to Dahmer's case, which is when Dahmer moved to Milwaukee, he'd committed a murder already, but when he moved to Milwaukee, he lived in West Allis with Grandma for a while. And while living with Grandma, he actually committed a few more murders there. But he's got to be really careful because it's Grandma's house. I don't want to alert her. I don't want her coming down to the basement and see what I'm doing. It wasn't until he had his own means, his own apartment, that he controlled 100%, that then he became an incredibly lethal killer. At that point, once he had control of his surroundings, that's when all of a sudden the murders kept coming and coming, because now he doesn't have to worry about anything. He's got to worry about noise. He's got neighbors up above, aside of him, all that stuff there, but he can control his environment. The problem with this killer up there, right, in Barron with Jamie Kloss, was he was living in a house that Dad still owned. Dad still had contact. The family members could still come in at any time. He didn't yet have control of his environment yet, but I put myself in his shoes. Let's say a year from now when he actually lands a job. I mean, this guy could not even get a job. He was such a loser. So, but now he gets a job and he's got money and he's able to get his own apartment. And now all of a sudden he gets control of his environment. a lethal killer that guy would have been. So thank goodness Jamie Kloss walks away from that with her life, and thank goodness he's found, because really, looking back, putting all those pieces together would have been something really bad.
You can read that full criminal complaint online. It's available. It's really interesting. And I find it weird too that he only was physical with her once. So he had her for a month or two. He was only physical with her once, hit her once, never sexually assaulted her or anything. It's just kind of odd that way too, when you think about the circumstances of that case.
Yeah, these weird people, and we have them. Always think about in this world, and if you guys stay in this field, that's what makes it so interesting. But this world does have predators, and predators are out there preying on the weak and the vulnerable. And so I look at it too, and it's like, you know, it's our job to stop that from happening, to try to prevent it from happening, obviously. But that's what makes it interesting, and I do think sometimes the world out there forgets that, like that there are some bad people that really need to be locked up, and that's the best place for them. Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the things he says, one of the last questions that the psychiatrist asked him was, if you were not in custody today, and if you were still out there, what would you be doing? And his response was, I never would have stopped. I enjoyed what I was doing, I loved what I was doing, and I would have continued to kill and kill and kill and kill until he was stopped. And he was stopped, and now he's in jail, right? And then he's all those things there. But these are people, they are predators, they will always be predators. There's something wrong in their psyche that's making them, that's rewiring and miswired, that makes them do these things. But believe me, folks, that's why we need us people here, people in the field there to catch these predators, right? Real quick support to FBI partners. The example that came to me was the Kenosha riots that just occurred. With all these protests and stuff that are going on, they are getting really nasty out there. And what starts out as a peaceful protest often leads to just pure rioting activity, looting, mayhem, arsons, assaults, you name it, really bad activity. So we've been trying to support, we the FBI, trying to support Kenosha PD, Milwaukee PD, Tosa PD, wherever these things are happening, to go and try to stop these violent people, those that are causing the trouble. I mean, who cares about the protesters? They're doing their thing. That's great. But the ones that are taking it that next level and committing criminal acts, they need to be stopped. Yes, sir.
What would that be classified as under one of these? I think it could fall under a few, but what did you guys classify?
Yeah, like kind of that type of behavior, a variety of things. So if people travel like interstate to commit criminal acts, so do you remember hearing a lot of the protesters, a lot came from other cities and states, right? So now they're crossing interstate lines to come here. And if they engage and inspire rioting type activity, you can look at that. You can look at conspiracy. A lot of arsons are being committed. Arson can be a federal and also a state offense. So there's a lot of offenses that are state and federal. You know, so assaults, sometimes if it's assault on an officer, it could be a federal and or a state charge. So there's a lot of kind of crossover.
So you guys have to be invited in for that? Like you see a lot of times?
Yeah, usually.
Or
Yeah.
you kind of just take over?
Yeah, no, usually you invite it in. I mean, we've got such good working relationships with so many of the police departments. They want our help. And when we're showing up, I mean, we're bringing big assets. We're bringing, planes, drones, expertise, profilers if need be, to try to profile these people. Our intel piece, gathering information on these travelers who are going to all these states, the rabble rousers, the people that are causing all the trouble. So we're just trying to watch that and see who's going where, committing all these criminal acts. So that's what we're watching for. And so the local PDs almost always will say, absolutely, we'll take more help. Yeah. I think next one here.
Didn't hear they were back in Kenosha again last night.
Yeah, this will be an ongoing, from a bureau standpoint, we'll be assisting a lot of the locals for quite a while, and there's going to be more coming. There always is. So we're doing a lot of interviews as well. We're interviewing people that have been arrested. It could be even a curfew violation, and we're talking to them. And what we're asking them is like, we don't care about your protest stuff there, but can you identify for us who are the criminal actors? Who are the ones starting the riots? Who are the ones doing the burning? Who are the ones doing the looting? Who are starting all of this stuff and instigating the criminal activity that's taking place? So that's really where our focus is. So that's where we want to look at. This is all kind of boring stuff. FBI authority, president, attorney general, Congress creates all the laws. Next one. A little bit more of that. We kind of talk about levels of investigations, assessments, preliminary investigations, full investigations. So when you kind of look at assessments, that's kind of like raw data. Somebody comes in your office one day and says, hey, such and such is going on. Okay, you just can't take someone's word for it that it's a criminal activity, right? Even if they say this crime's been committed, you got to still corroborate it and verify it. So you might start a preliminary investigation where you say, well, I just want to look at this. This guy's alleging some really big things. So you start a preliminary investigation, you find out more, and you're like, okay, I think what he came in and told us does seem to be corroborated and validated. So now we can open up a full investigation, which all that means is you've got all of our capabilities to investigate that crime. So you've got grand jury subpoenas and this, that, the other thing. You can use all the techniques that we use. We talk a lot about wiring people up and getting it out on audio and videotape. I know, I live in this world too. People want to see their crimes on video. They want to hear it on audio. That's what gets convictions. So a lot of cases I've worked through the years, that's what I try to do. I try to get as much as I can on audio and video so people literally can see the crime on tape. And then I know it usually prevents even a trial, because if you're the subject and you see that evidence, you're like, okay, I'm pleading guilty, and move on. All right. So a little bit into getting into some of the assets that we have. So the SWAT teams, of course, everyone knows what that is. I did SWAT from the whole time in Minneapolis, so 12 years there. I did about 3 years here in Milwaukee. So I stepped off the SWAT team because I was getting too old and let all the young bumpkins go in there ready to kick indoors and do all the fun stuff. And it is a ball, of course, as it always is. You get all the great gear, you get all the good training, you get to do some really cool missions. In 2002, I went to the Salt Lake Olympics. So it was the Winter Olympics down in Salt Lake. So our SWAT team from Minneapolis, amongst many other teams, got to travel down there. We were down there for about 5 weeks. What was good for us is they finally got the northern states. Like we always think we're never being called up for all the big stuff because we're in Timbuktu country, Wisconsin, Minnesota. But we got all the cold weather gear. So they're like, hey, this is the Winter Olympics. We got to bring some teams in here that have coats and jackets and boots. So they got to do some really cool stuff. So SWAT programs, when I stepped off of SWAT programs, I went into the negotiator program. So to be a crisis negotiator. So probably some of the most unique and fun training I've had, and it's helpful for almost any interviews that you do, the techniques that you're taught with crisis negotiation. So those it's been a great thing. I stayed with that for about 7 years, and I just stepped off of that. So crisis negotiators, behavioral specialists, profilers. So one of the first active shooting cases I went to was at Red Lake Indian Reservation. Red Lake is in northern part of Minnesota, north part of the state. On the Indian Reservation, a kid drove into the high school with a police vehicle. His grandfather was a police officer. Takes grandfather's car after killing grandfather and girlfriend, drives into the high school, goes into the high school with a shotgun, just starts shooting and slaughtering a bunch of people. The tribal police show up. The tribal police actually shoot him and end up ending the active shooting incident. So the next couple days we were up there, and active shooting was still fairly new. In '99 we had Columbine, right, in the high school down there, but still relative. This would have been 2005, 2006, where I went to that one. Still, it wasn't like it is nowadays. Nowadays, no one, their blood pressure doesn't go up anymore because it happens so often. But what was interesting was we had criminal profilers. So some of our FBI profilers came out to our command post to work the school because we want to try to identify any other potential shooters or his group of friends that may also be wanting to do something like that. So we were conducting those type of interviews. So it was really interesting and fun to have the profilers work in the same case that you have and learning kind of how they do their tradecraft, which is pretty neat. All right, next. So we're talking about responses. So the field office response, regional response. When things get really heavy, we've got big problems. We call Chicago field office. They've got 500 agents. We have in Milwaukee, the whole Wisconsin, we have 100 agents. So we can quickly get people up here. They've got several different SWAT teams. We can get tactical assets, aircraft, whatever we need. So we have that capability, and that's throughout the United States. Next. And then a national response. So that's when you look at the big stuff there. A 9/11 is the biggest example, of course, where we have everything that we got in our arsenal, we're bringing out to investigate it. So those are those really big disasters and stuff. And then you don't know. You're looking at it to try to find that criminal nexus to it. Is it just a natural disaster, or is there a criminal act that took place? So looking at that. And then current challenges is a lot what I talked about already. Same type of cases here. Frauds, these are just some of the areas that we're working. I think that might be the last one. Okay, and then we do the cyber CT. So international domestic terrorists, homegrown violent extremists, like our Milwaukee guy there, he was kind of just online listening to all the jihadist type talk, got radicalized, and then he wants to go do something. We had a gal just in Cudahy. She just pled guilty. I think she got sentenced. She was doing it all online. She was forwarding on all these radicalized type videos to different people who she believed were going to act on it. So she was trying to inspire others, and she's sitting in here in Cudahy, Wisconsin, and she's sitting here and floating this stuff all over the place, trying to get radicalized people to do what? Harm and kill Americans, right? So I'm like, I'm just glad we find these people before they get too far. Next. Okay, I think that's it. So I wanted to have a little time. We got about 8 minutes left, so I wanted to hit some questions if you guys have them. How many field offices? There you go. So you're halfway there.
What's the mission of the FBI?
Yeah, we kind of talked about mission statement. I would say to, defend the United States in regards to national security and criminal. So working national security and criminal cases is to support, defend the Constitution of the United States. How's that?
It's on your test.
So that's pretty close. Yes, ma'am.
What makes the case confidential? When family members ask, how's work or something, what makes a case where you can't really bring it home or discuss with them?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
How do you, what do you consider, when you have a case, to make it confidential, where you can't talk about it, what makes a case confidential?
Yeah, and that's a good question too earlier, how you get your cases. One of the best examples was my public corruption one with the contractor who come into our office one day and alleges, hey, I went to a city councilman and he said basically I got to pay him $5,000 for him to do his job, right? So we take that little bit of information. Public corruption cases, for an example, are really, you want to keep those tight to the vest here. Part of the reason is this, is what if you get bogus information? What if the complainant who comes into your office one day, what if they just have a vendetta? They just don't like this politician, for example, and they give us some baloney information. We don't want to make that public, we don't want to outwardly be talking about it because we don't want to harm the reputation of that politician, right? Because what if they're completely innocent, right? We see it all the time where people are gossiping one thing or the other, but you want to make sure that it's solid, good information, because you don't want to ruin someone's career off of trying to investigate it when it turns out to be baloney the whole time. So with some of the cases we work, especially national security, I would say you want to keep it close. You don't want to be talking about it to anybody, not family, not friends, until it's all over with. When it's all over with, resolved, that's a different story. Most of my cases now, so old, I can openly talk about it. But those are the ones you keep close. While you're investigating it, keep it tight. You don't want it to be leaked out, that type of stuff.
So is it accurate to say that usually once the case is over, it's kind of declassified for public information?
Yeah, if it's national security, they have a declassification process. It still can take years. It still could be 5 years, 10 years, 25 years before they declassify stuff, depending at the level it was at. So that is that one unique thing. Like our systems, we go to top secret. Every agent who comes out of the academy, you have a top secret clearance. So yeah, so that's kind of a big deal. We go through some really significant background investigations to get that top secret clearance, but once you got it, it's important, but you want to safeguard it as well. So having that clearance, you don't want to just be talking about this, that, the other thing. Yes, sir?
For what's the actual typical day for a newer agent that's out of the academy and they're in their assignment
What's their day like? So I got a brand new agent started yesterday, former Chicago cop, 3 years. He's now with the FBI. I'm going to be his training agent. So just yesterday, I take him to lunch, and I was telling Mike here, I said, all right, Mike, I said, so he's already, he just got out of the academy, so he's ready to go, man. He's all fired up. He wants to hit the ground running. He's going to be on a gang drug squad. So Mike, thank goodness, he's got some experience being on the streets of America and knowing a little bit of what he's going to face, but there can be some tough characters in any gang drug type of an organization. But he's already talking about, yeah, what kind of stuff do I do? How do I get sources? How do I start building cases? And probably the biggest thing is they're going to be working on a task force, and they've already got a lot of cases in the mix. He's going to jump in with those guys, probably be like a co-case agent, just watch and listen for the first several weeks, months, and then get his feet wet, learn the paperwork, how it needs to be done. And then he'll start slowly getting sources as they start to interview people on the streets. There might be people that want to become an FBI source. So now you're going to start to develop a source base out there. This person's going to be reporting on criminal activity. You're documenting all that on your reports. So a fair amount of what we do, a lot of the cases tend to be kind of bigger cases, a little bit more long-term, a lot of report writing. So plan on sitting at your computer, in your laptops, and writing reports. Document it, document it, document it. So that's one of the biggest things. Whenever you have a writing class and you're grousing about it, just think, my day is filled with 40% writing. Reports, analyzing, different records, your email, your scanning functions. You can communicate so well now, right, without having to actually go out and about. So that's what a lot of your day is a lot of it at the office because of the type of cases we have. And then when you get out in the field, of course, that's super fun too, right? Now you're knocking on doors and doing all that stuff. In the back? No? Okay.
What education do you need to get into, or how do you get into the FBI?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. Education for the FBI, a bachelor's degree. That's it. It doesn't have to be in any specific thing. It doesn't have to be criminal justice. It doesn't have to be criminology. It doesn't have to be biology. You name it, you have to have a 4-year degree, but I forgot, when I say that, minimum 4-year degree and then some work experience. Usually they want 2 or 3 years of work experience. They call it professional work experience. So let's say we've got a husband and wife team in our office that we're both teachers, both high school teachers. One was biology, one was math. And they did it for, 8 years or so, and they just wasn't tripping their trigger. They wanted to change. They wanted to try something different. One of them like, hey, maybe I'll become an FBI agent. So they start applying, and the husband gets in. The wife's looking at it going, well, maybe I'll become an agent. So sure enough, they both went through the academy, both got in. They're high school teachers. So medical field, science degrees, finance degrees, law school, accountants, business degrees, you name it. Here's the thing about the FBI, they take a broad group of everybody. And everyone brings that experience to the table. So they're not always just looking for cops. They're not always looking just for lawyers and accountants. We get a lot of military guys, former military officers that decide, after they're done with the military, come into the FBI. But we get a broad range of people. Linguists. Foreign language skills is huge. Cyber experience, right? So computer science, coding, all that stuff there. You're going to be on our cyber squads. So a vast array of stuff, of backgrounds is what they look for. My class of 50 at the academy, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, some of these people are just brilliant. Some guy, I was a scientist at NASA. I was helping on build a rocket, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, he's an FBI agent, a teacher, a business guy, cop. Military, you name it, all across the board. But minimum 4-year degree with some work experience is like what they look for. Most people getting in is about 30, so about 29 or 30 years old when you get into the Bureau. So we typically are taking more seasoned people. No matter what they did in those early years after college, we tend to bring people on that are a little more seasoned, have done a few things in life, and aren't too fresh yet, too raw. So that's why even like cops. So I did that law enforcement stuff there, and to me, the FBI was a nice progression, right? Different type of cases, but still similar. So, yes, sir.
So then that guy that you're going to be training, how did he get in so fast if you're taking more seasoned people? If he's
So he would have got his degree in, and I think he told me he was in the medical field. He made his degree, I think, was biology or something. He got out and he started doing some medic type stuff, paramedic. And then he decided to join the police department. So the 3 years on the police force was 3 years of professional experience. And then whatever he had before that, he probably did a year or two of other stuff. Because I think he's right there. I think he's right around 30 years old. He's right on that average. That's exactly when I came in. I was 30 years old when I came in. And again, that's not everybody. Sometimes we take the younger ones there, a lot of advanced degrees, of course. That's bare minimum is that 4-year. But of course, better chance if you got a master's and all the PhD, and we do have people, all sorts of stuff. Anything else? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys are interested in this field. Law enforcement has really been getting a smackdown lately. We've been really taking it. Seems like everyone's against you lately. But believe me, it is one of the most fulfilling, rewarding careers out there. So keep your eyes open for those who want to go into it. Any first responder type field, believe me, is well worth it, rewarding. The pay, you're never going to be a millionaire, but you don't go into it to be a millionaire anyways. But at the end of the day, you feel good about what you do. You're helping people, serving the community, all those type of things. So I hope a bunch of you decide to go in that direction, and we need good qualified people even more so now, right? And good solid folks that are going to go out there and do a good job for our communities. So, thank you. All right, thanks.